Welcome to this video on socialism. I'm Andrew Chapman. I'm a professor of philosophy, and I'll be your guide. In addition to this video, I've also created a handout covering the content of the video. A link to the handout is available in the video description. It may be helpful to have this handout in front of you as you watch the video. And now on to socialism. Socialism is a political and economic philosophy dedicated to restructuring society in order to reduce inequality and ensure the equitable distribution of wealth and power. It advocates for the collective or governmental ownership of the means of production, that is, things like factories, resources, and infrastructure, and calls for robust social welfare systems that guarantee access to fundamental resources such as healthcare, education, and employment. Proponents of socialism argue that leaving these matters solely to market forces and the profit motive results in systemic imbalances that favor a small group of capitalists at the expense of the broader population. By contrast, socialist arrangements seek to center social well-being and cooperation, championing the idea that economic systems should serve the common good rather than private profit. While the general aim of socialism is to replace or reform capitalist structures, there's considerable diversity within the socialist tradition regarding how this should be achieved, the role of the state, and the exact forms of ownership and control that best promote socioeconomic justice. The emergence of socialism is deeply intertwined with the profound social, economic, and political changes of the Industrial Revolution. As industrial capitalism took hold in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, it fueled technological advances and urbanization while simultaneously exposing stark inequalities in wealth and power. Factories became sites of grueling labor conditions, and newly formed industrial working classes struggled against low wages, long hours, and often inhumane environments. Against this backdrop, early socialist thinkers like Henri de Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, and Robert Owen formulated alternative visions of society, proposing experiments in utopian communities and reforms aimed at alleviating the exploitation they witnessed. These early ventures, though limited in scale and effectiveness, planted the conceptual seeds that would influence future generations. By the mid-19th century, socialism underwent a critical transformation, largely due to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Their influential works, notably the Communist Manifesto from 1848 and Marx's Das Kapital, written between 1867 and 1894, propelled socialism into a broader intellectual and political movement. Marx and Engels introduced a systematic critique of capitalism, highlighting class struggle as the motor of historical change and insisting that the injustices perpetrated by capitalists against workers were not anomalies but inherent features of capitalist society. Their theories inspired labor movements, political parties, and revolutionary groups around the world, shaping the tumultuous politics of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Socialist ideas, emphasizing collective ownership, equality, and class solidarity, became central to debates about industrialization, democracy, and the moral obligations of the state. As the 20th century unfolded, socialism continued to evolve, influencing revolutions and governance models in Russia, Eastern Europe, Asia, and Latin America, leaving an indelible mark on global politics. Among the many figures who have shaped socialist thought, Karl Marx stands as the most renowned. Alongside Friedrich Engels, Marx developed an expansive analysis of capitalism that dissected how economic relations under capitalism produce class divisions, alienate workers from their labor, each other, and themselves, and create cycles of crisis. Marx believed that the overthrow of capitalist ownership structures would be a historical necessity once workers recognized their common interests and organized collectively. In Marx's vision, a transitional socialist phase would precede the establishment of full communism, where communism is marked by a stateless, classless society in which resources and goods are distributed according to need. Subsequent generations of socialists adapted Marx's framework to diverse historical contexts. In Russia, Vladimir Lenin spearheaded the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, arguing that a vanguard party must lead the working class to seize state power and establish socialism. Leon Trotsky further developed ideas about permanent revolution and internationalism, advocating that socialist transformation could only succeed if it spread beyond national borders. Others, such as Rosa Luxemburg, combined Marxist critiques with an insistence on democracy and mass participation. Later in the century, socialists like Allende in Chile, Nehru in India, and various European social democrats incorporated socialist principles into governance strategies that aimed at safeguarding civil liberties while expanding state provisions for education, healthcare, and social insurance. Although socialism includes numerous currents and approaches, it's united by the conviction that the economy should be directed toward collective welfare rather than purely private profit. At its heart is the belief that individuals should not be left solely at the mercy of market forces and the profit motive. Instead, the state or the community has a crucial role in regulating the economy, preventing extreme inequality, and providing a robust safety net to protect citizens from economic insecurity. This outlook often translates into policies such as nationalizing key industries like utilities, healthcare, and transportation, so they function as public services rather than as sources of private profit. By placing essential sectors under public stewardship, socialists seek to ensure that everyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, can access vital goods and services. Socialism also promotes the idea of distributive justice, aiming to rectify the systemic advantages that capital owners enjoy under capitalism. Rather than letting wealth pool in the hands of a few, socialist theories generally advocate progressive taxation, social welfare programs, and labor protections to uplift the broader population. Not all socialists agree on the precise form of ownership. Some favor state ownership, others champion worker cooperatives or municipal governance, but they generally share the goal of attenuating exploitative market dynamics and fostering a more egalitarian society. Additionally, socialism places a strong emphasis on democracy, seeing collective decision-making processes as the bedrock of social ownership. This can mean representative political structures that ensure accountability in state-run industries, or, alternatively, workplace democracy that empowers employees to have a direct say in production and management decisions. In practice, socialism has manifested in a variety of forms, shaped by cultural, economic, and political contexts. In Western Europe, democratic socialism emerged as a significant force during the 20th century, merging competitive market economies with strong social welfare states. Through policies such as universal health care, free or low-cost education, extensive labor rights, and social housing, these governments aimed to reduce the worst inequalities of market capitalism while preserving certain market freedoms. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway have become emblematic of this democratic socialist model, featuring high levels of social spending, significant unionization, and corporate regulations, yet still maintaining private enterprise. Elsewhere, particularly in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc nations, a more centralized socialist approach took shape, in which the state exerted strict control over production and distribution. Advocates of such models argued that central planning could eliminate cyclical crises inherent to capitalism and ensure rational allocation of resources according to social priorities. Critics, however, noted the bureaucratic rigidities, lack of political freedoms, and inefficiencies that came with top-down command economies, as exemplified by the economic stagnation and political repression that many of these nations experienced. Meanwhile, countries like Cuba and China undertook distinct revolutionary paths, endeavoring to combine socialism with their particular historical and cultural settings. Collectively, these examples illustrate socialism's adaptability, its ongoing tension with capitalism, and its capacity to inspire a wide range of policy experiments. Socialism's broad ideological scope gives rise to numerous debates, particularly regarding how profound an economic transformation is required and how quickly it should be pursued. Reformist or democratic socialists, for instance, argue that capitalism can be gradually reshaped via electoral politics, institutional reforms, and incremental regulatory measures that champion workers' rights, social programs, and strict checks on corporate power. They often assert that democracy itself is compromised by massive wealth disparities, and that social welfare initiatives and public ownership of key industries can align with a functioning, pluralistic political system. Revolutionary socialists, on the other hand, insist that genuine socialism demands a decisive overthrow of capitalist relations, contending that entrenched economic elites will never willingly relinquish power. These revolutionaries believe incremental reforms fail to challenge the deeper dynamics of class exploitation and cannot prevent capital from reasserting dominance. They sometimes argue for a transitional state apparatus, often described as a dictatorship of the proletariat, that once capitalism is eradicated would eventually wither away, resulting in a classless society known as communism. Additional debates center on the feasibility of socialist economies in a globalized world, the balance between planning and market mechanisms, and the tension between collective goals and individual freedoms. These differences underscore the plurality of socialist visions, including anarcho-socialism, eco-socialism, and market socialism, each with its own interpretation of how socialist principles can and should operate. Critics of socialism frequently underscore concerns about economic inefficiency, claiming that state control stifles innovation and individual initiative. They argue that without competitive incentives, productivity declines, leading to shortages, slower technological progress, and stagnating living standards. Others warn about the risk of concentrating power in the hands of the state, which can pave the way for authoritarian governance and the suppression of dissent. Citing historical examples from the Soviet Union, Maoist China, or other planned economies, opponents argue that socialism tends to erode personal liberties and foster bureaucratic abuses. Socialists respond by pointing to social democratic achievements in Europe, where strong welfare states coexist with relatively high standards of living, robust civil liberties, and high rates of technological innovation. They maintain that the existence of private markets in certain areas does not preclude public ownership of core services, so long as democratic oversight ensures accountability. Socialists also argue that many capitalist societies suffer from profound inequalities and cyclical crises, suggesting that an economy guided by social needs rather than profit motives could prove more stable, equitable, and resilient. Furthermore, they highlight how capitalist production strategies often neglect externalities, such as environmental costs, leading to ecological degradation that threatens long-term sustainability, an issue socialists believe collective planning could more adequately address. The influence of socialist thought is not confined to economics or political science. It reaches literature, history, philosophy, and cultural studies as well. Sociologists use socialist frameworks to analyze class structures, social stratification, and power relations in various societies. Historians trace the roots and evolutions of socialist movements, examining how labor struggles, political revolutions, and social reforms were fueled by socialist ideals. In the arts, socialist and Marxist critiques of culture have assessed how class interests inform artistic production and the dissemination of cultural values, prompting theoretical developments around the role of art in social change. Additionally, ethics and moral philosophy grapple with socialist questions about the fair distribution of resources, the rights and responsibilities of individuals, and the extent of collective solidarity. As global awareness of environmental concerns grows, eco-socialist arguments intertwine critiques of capitalism with the urgent necessity of ecological sustainability, blending insights from environmental studies with socialist economic thought. In the current era, socialism experiences periodic surges of popularity, often linked to financial crises, widening economic disparities, and pressing social or environmental challenges. Many young people, in particular, express dissatisfaction with stagnant wages, higher costs of living, and the perceived failures of neoliberal capitalism to address global issues such as climate change, financial instability, and structural injustice. While radical socialist movements endure in some parts of the world, contemporary discussions frequently revolve around how social democratic policies or redistributive mechanisms can temper the harshest inequalities of unregulated markets and the profit motive. Political parties that embrace either moderate or more extensive socialist agendas continue to wield influence in Europe, Latin America, and many other regions, shaping debates over healthcare reform, public education, labor rights, and environmental regulation. Moreover, technology and digital platforms have sparked new conversations about the management of data, automation, and artificial intelligence. Some socialist theorists propose that automation, if governed democratically and aimed at social well-being rather than corporate profit, could reduce drudgery and free human potential for more creative pursuits. Others caution that big tech corporations exemplify the perils of private ownership concentrated in a few hands, reinforcing the socialist critique of monopolies and corporate power. In this sense, socialism's capacity to adapt its analysis to contemporary circumstances underscores its resilience as an ideological force. The influence of socialism can be seen in the global adoption of public healthcare systems, universal education, labor protections, and social security programs. Even nations that do not formally identify as socialist often incorporate these elements into their policy frameworks, highlighting the broader acceptance of some socialist principles. Historically, socialist revolutions and reforms have drastically reshaped political maps, from the Soviet Union's role in 20th century geopolitics to the wave of leftist governments that took power in Latin America. Socialism's critiques of capitalism, notably concerning exploitation and inequality, have spurred ongoing debates about how societies might balance market dynamism with moral and social imperatives. Despite internal disagreements and external challenges, socialism remains a central strand in global political discourse, an enduring reference point for those who argue that capitalism can be unjust, unstable, and environmentally unsustainable if left unregulated. While the practical implementations of socialism have varied widely, some veering into authoritarianism, others existing within pluralistic democratic systems, the underlying ethos of promoting shared prosperity and curtailing the power of unregulated markets and the profit motive continues to resonate. The legacies of Marx, Engels, and their successors thus live on, not merely in academic treatises or historical revolutions, but in the very fabric of modern welfare states, labor laws, and public institutions. In conclusion, socialism is a transformative outlook that seeks to remedy the perceived injustices and instabilities of capitalism by advocating collective ownership of resources, the redistribution of wealth, and policies that protect individuals from the vagaries of market forces. Tracing its roots to the industrial upheavals of the 18th and 19th centuries, it expanded dramatically under the influence of Marx and Engels, and has since been interpreted in myriad ways, from democratic socialism in Western Europe to the more centralized, state-driven models of the Soviet era. Although heavily debated on grounds of efficiency, personal freedoms, and its real-world track record, socialism has profoundly shaped modern states by inspiring welfare provisions, public services, and labor protections. As social inequalities persist and new challenges arise, socialism continues to adapt, inviting fresh discussions about how best to organize economies, address climate crises, and realize a more equitable world.